Projects of all sizes, from IT rollouts to organisational transformations, can falter without effective change management. Think of failed software implementations like the UK's NHS patient record system or Quibi's streaming platform, or poorly received products like the Ford Edsel. Even corporate restructures can suffer the same outcomes. In this episode, Romaine Charlton will share the 5 things change managers wish project managers understood before writing the project plan, and the key insights for working effectively with a change manager to ensure project success. At Powering ProjeX, we champion the growth of project people, empowering every subscriber to lead with distinction, drive impactful outcomes, and turn vision into victory. Through sharp insights, inspiring stories, and energetic conversations, we will celebrate the exceptional people who transform industries and build a better world. Welcome to the Powering ProjeX podcast, where we explore the strategies, stories, and insights that make projects thrive. I'm your host, DK, and today we're diving into a topic that we believe we understand, but we often overlook: the importance of change management and how it can help your organisation deliver on-point, human-centric outcomes that are well-received and adopted. But before we kick off, if you want to join a community that puts your career first, gain global connections, cutting-edge skills, and hear from voices just like yours who are shaping the project management industry, subscribe to the podcast now. So the problem statement for today: projects of all sizes, from IT rollouts to organisational transformations, can falter without effective change management. Think of failed software implementations like the UK's NHS patient record system, the Quibi streaming platform, or poorly received products like the Ford Edsel. Even corporate restructures can suffer the same outcomes. In this episode, we're joined by Romaine Charlton, change manager extraordinaire, who will share the 5 things change managers wish project managers understood before writing a project plan, and the key insights for working effectively with a change manager to ensure project success. Romaine has spent the last 20 plus years leading and supporting organisations through change, from major ERP rollouts to digital transformations and workforce redesigns, whether outsourcing, organisational reorgs, or mergers and acquisitions. Focus is making change management simple, practical, and actionable, so the outcomes align with strategic and tactical delivery goals. She has partnered with companies like Orica, Incitec Pivot, NAB, BHP, SAP, and Tabcorp, largely in private but sometimes the public sector, both locally and internationally, helping project teams cut through complexity and bring structure to the chaos of change. Her approach to successful change management outcomes is to adopt proven frameworks like Prosci ADKAR to fit each organisation's context and pace, so that projects aren't just delivered, they're embraced by the people who are affected by change. Project managers know the pressure to keep things moving while juggling stakeholders, shifting scope, and resistance. That's where Romaine, as a change manager, comes in to help bridge strategy and execution, simplifying the change curve so people stay engaged and outcomes stick. Welcome, Romaine.
Thanks, Daniela. That was quite an introduction.
Thank you. I like to make sure that people are appropriately introduced. I mean, it's not, you want people to be able to acknowledge all of the effort and time and sweat and tears that have gone into amassing 20 years worth of work experience. I don't actually like it when people overlook it, because it's really important. You've dedicated so much of your life to it. That makes sense.
That's true. And you've built that experience stack along the way, which, it's part of what sharing in today's episode is about too, I guess. So, thank you.
Correct. So tell me, share what sparked your passion for change management and why it's so pivotal for projects.
I think that goes back to my uni days quite by accident. I actually did an IT degree, but one of the subjects in first year I remember was called organizational design. I had no idea what it was, but I remember being really energized and interested just in that topic. Anyway, I did one topic and that was it. Then I went, graduated from uni and found my way into project world. And I started to work in teams where there was change management. And I became really curious about what this change management was. So I actually landed on a project. It was actually my project at Orica, and I focused on training at the time and did the first phase of it. And then the change lead at the time, because training sat under change, she rang me and said, "Oh, we'd like to extend you." I was contracting at the time. And I said, "Great." And I said, "But I took this as my opportunity." And I said, "I actually want to get into change. Is there any way that you can help me make my role more change aligned? Because I really want to get the hands-on experience now." So she was a little bit surprised. Anyway, she went away, and thanks to Lucy Brewer, she came back and she said, "We're going to turn it into a training change consultant role." And so that was really my first step into actually doing the change management. And from there, I just loved it. I'd always done consulting. So I enjoyed the energy of sitting and problem solving with the client and coming up with a solution. But I realized that I actually liked the people focus of it, of really sitting down and working through and helping people understand what the change meant for them and how their job was going to, and how they needed to be job ready, essentially. And so then I started to, I guess, get an understanding of the process of change. And then from there, just went on to the next gig. And then in 2012, I went off and did Prosci. And so that gave me a good structure and framework, and I've not looked back.
Oh, that's amazing. It's interesting, isn't it, how sometimes you have those pivotal turning point moments in your life. Had you not asked for that because you felt an affinity to it, it may not have ever transpired.
Happened. No, true. Yeah. And so I'm really grateful for that opportunity because it did give me the ground roots of what it was actually like, just to start at the very bottom. And actually that transition of balancing the two between training and change was a really good way to step into it for me as well. And yeah, very grateful to Lucy, and she supported me through that process as well, because I really had no idea. And watching it and actually doing it is different.
Yeah. So just explain to me, just take a step backwards. And when you talk about change management and then you talk about training, because I know when I wrote my project plan, those two elements, the tasks on my schedule, they're always very close together, but they are very distinct things. And there was obviously something that you personally had an affinity to. Like, what was your why about change management? What was it that sort of made you think, this is where I like to spend my time?
I moved into training because I'd started a family. And so it gave me, I guess, that opportunity to do it a bit more flexibly. But what I discovered after a little while was training was very much about a piece of tech is going live and there's a structure you have to follow. It's not really something you can come and show initiative about. There's a task such as create a purchase order, and it's pretty clear what steps you have to follow. There's no bringing yourself into it. And you're following a structured framework. Whereas what I know I enjoy about people is because we're dynamic, it's about understanding the problem and then finding a solution that's not a one size fits all for the people that are impacted by that change. And so that forces you to think, it forces you to bring some of your creativity within a structured framework, because I do like structure, because otherwise you can go off piste. But I think that's the key difference. So change, it's not linear. It's a bit more fluid. You've got to bring yourself, and from a human-centric perspective, put yourself in someone's shoes. I guess you do the same with training as well, but the outcome is very defined. And so you don't have that level of creativity and intuition to bring into it at the same level. I don't know if that it resonates. It does. But yeah.
You said it, there's an intuitive element to
Yeah.
change management. So talk me through that. What's the intuition that you get and apply?
I think it's firstly because it's people centric and people focused. So it's about, I guess, to put it simply, change management focus on people that are going through some sort of change. And it's about supporting them to understand what that change is and how it's going to impact their new way of working, whatever that is, whether it's a piece of tech, merger and acquisition, it's all affecting how people are actually potentially going to do their work differently, who they might communicate with, what the structures of the organisation are that are going to change, what the culture is that might change, that discombobulates us as human beings. So I think from that perspective, and not all humans are the same. So we're not homogenous. We're all very dynamic. And it's really then understanding our job as change practitioners is to understand the problem, to build a clear narrative. And then, like preaching, I guess, or like politicians, you've got to take that problem with a solution and find a way to encourage people to come along and adopt that new way of working. And so, maybe for the majority of people, they will adopt to it. But for the people that sit on the outside of that, the outliers, you've got to understand them. So it's a discovery process. And then you've got to apply, well, here's my problem. Here's where we've got to go. How do I turn this around to make these people understand and get on board, essentially? And so it's a tweaking. You might go with something that you think feels right. And then you think, oh, that hasn't cracked it with that person or that group of people. And so it's this constant learning and refining until you find the right levers to bring those people on. Sounds a bit esoteric, but it's communication and engagement. And I think that's one of the most important things in change. It's not sitting at a desk, writing documents, writing comms and just sending it out. You've got to be talking to people to understand what they're feeling and thinking about the change, and then building in those activities or actions to help them along.
So it sounds like the best change management is quite iterative and
It is.
in the moment. It sounds like it probably lends itself very well to agile because it is just that constant feedback loop here and just keep going through it until you start to see the cohort behaving with more confidence. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an iterative process. You go back, you go forward, you go back, you go forward, you go back. It's not linear necessarily, but yeah. And so that's what I love about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be because
constantly discovery. So you can't sit back and go, oh, I've got that right. Because I've got it right, maybe for this group of people, but I have to tweak something and do it differently for this group of people.
Yeah.
And these groups of people talk to each other. So you've constantly got to be managing that relationship, or you're on your toes, you kept on your toes.
Well, let's get into the real questions for today. So what is the key difference between a PM and a change manager?
I think the simplest way to put it is that the project manager is typically accountable for delivering the thing on time, on budget, to scope with the right resources at the right time. Whereas, as we've been talking, the change manager, we're more accountable for making sure the people that are impacted by the change understand and know what that change means for them. So that they're job ready, as I say, and willing and able to use that new thing comfortably and confidently. And then our proficiency grows from that point on, and we feel comfortable then after that. So that's what it's really about, I think. So it's the two sides of delivering that value outcome.
So tell me something. Remember, we talk a lot about sort of the change management curve, right?
Yes.
And what actually happens as we guide people through this. I've been on many a project and led many a project where stakeholders will say sentiment is very low. And it's like, yeah, that's part of the curve. It's going to hit a rock bottom point, which is much lower than what you ever anticipated or thought you would experience. before it starts to make its way back up, and then it will plateau at some point. And people are always really surprised by that. They're always like, oh my God, people are saying terrible things. Yeah, that was always going to happen. So tell me a little bit about all of those things and what do you experience? And we talk about the fact that people's experience of new capability will start to improve at some point. But I'm also always interested to see that go live is not that point. At the point of go live, people's sentiment about what's being implemented can still be quite low. And it's not until after that it starts to improve. So talk me through what your experience is. And maybe that's got more to do with the success and failure of the project. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Look, I think I've split it into two parts. So the change curve or the valley of despair or the many names that it's had over the iterations. And then you mentioned about go live. You can find that sentiment is still low. That would worry me and I'll work backwards, if that sentiment at go live was low, because that's part of the change management. It is moving those people or the majority of people up so that they do feel positive and supported. And if the sentiment is low, you need to go into a discovery to understand why. But in a corporate perspective, I think because today in particular, the amount of change that people undergo is just continuous. And the change curve is just, I guess, one of those kind of informal metrics that we use to gauge the typical mindset or emotional behavior that humans go through. And it's not just in work. If you think about it in terms of, we get told that we've lost our job today, or sadly, we hear some sad news that someone has passed away. We all go through that change curve where we hear about it, we then process it, we then either don't like it, or sometimes we move back and forth as well. We don't just move through that in a nice sequence. We can oscillate and bounce between all those emotions. And then we can be angry, why me? I don't like this. And then we come to a place of acceptance because we continue to hear about it. And that's slow. Oh, maybe it's not so bad actually. And then we start to feel a little bit more confident. And then our emotion comes up to that sort of peak where we accept. And sometimes we're actually happy because the outcome for us personally has been a positive one. So managing that from a change perspective, it's understanding that it's very normal for people to traverse through that curve, as you've pointed out, and people will traverse differently along there. And as I said, they'll bounce back and forth. But there's so many more factors that are involved when we hear leaders say sentiment is low, and that's part of the discovery work that I like to do when I start on a piece of work. It's understanding, so what changes have happened over the last 6 to 18 months? How have they been delivered? What has been the sentiment of those changes? And what are the learnings that we've taken from that so that we don't repeat the same things in this particular delivery? And we actually take some of that feedback and share it openly in our engagements and communications, so that the people know that we've actually listened, we've heard, and we've learned. And I think it's not just about that emotional curve, but it's about all these other elements within an organisation that people get really frustrated with. And the common one that you'll hear is, oh, we've tried this before and it hasn't worked. But why? Why hasn't it worked? And what are we going to do differently? Because this change is happening. So how, as a change manager, do I need to change what's happened in the past in the way it's been delivered and make it different? And so I think that is really the key thing. And that's why it's so dynamic. You can't just, because it was delivered in a certain way, if it didn't land properly, then let's not keep doing the same thing. Let's do something different.
That's really interesting. But We'll move on to the next question.
No,
Because
it's very interesting. That's why I said to you, what do I
yeah.
love about change? It's dynamic. It's not the same. I can take the stack of learning, but when I walk into somewhere, I've got the framework and the structure, but I can't just cookie cutter it. I've got to understand all these dynamics that have happened in the organisation.
Mm. So, what are the 5 things that you wish PMs understood before they write the project plan? Because this is really important.
Oh, I love this question. Yeah. There's a few things. We'll talk about the 5. So I think the first thing I'm going to say is, do PMs actually understand what change management is? And that can be framed by the experience of who they've worked with in the past. But I think if they have a really good understanding, and I hate talking theory, but I think that's one of the first things. Do you understand what change management is? It's not just comms, it's not just training. And to your point, that's just what gets plumped on the plan. But there's so many other elements that are really critical in that change management framework that may be applicable to the change delivery that PMs need to understand. So I think that's the first thing. And quite often it's then overlooked and it's not built into the plan. It's not given sufficient time and effort. And so therefore, from a change delivery perspective, we mightn't see the best outcomes. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think with that understanding of change management is making sure that there's clear role and responsibilities defined. And that's even between the change manager and the PM. And as we talked about, the PM's about managing the tasks and the activities from a project plan perspective, and change is about supporting the people. But it's even just making sure that we get that clarity of what those tasks and activities are. And I've worked with some PMs, and apologies if I offend anyone, that they think they know change or they think they've done change and they want to structure my line. And it's like, well, no, I've got my roles and responsibilities. And if I mess it up, I'm totally accountable. But let's just make sure we understand what those change roles and responsibilities are. So I think that's number 2. Number 3 for me is that quite often, particularly if we focus on like a tech rollout, PMs will focus on the technical readiness and they'll always talk about go live from a technical perspective. Have we done the testing? Have we deployed? Have we got the production system up and running? When are we doing cutover? They sometimes overlook or don't put enough emphasis on, but what does this mean from a people perspective? Are our people ready? Because technology ready doesn't mean that people are ready. So I think if change managers and PMs can work more closely and align on the understanding of what change management is, get understanding and agreement on the responsibilities, and then partner together, I think that's the other thing. And if PMs can support the change managers to allow them their airtime and also focus on the people readiness activities, which should be built into the plan. And then, as we've talked about, because it's so dynamic and it's not linear, I think the other thing is that typically a project plan is quite linear. Like you've got your activities, your dependencies, and your key milestones. And yes, the change management activities do fit into that. But as we've talked about, because people are so dynamic, and when you're combining what's happening from a technology perspective or an M&A that is also dynamic, you've constantly, from a change perspective, you've got to be, there's this balance that's going on all the time. And so you might be going along a path and think that this is how the change is going to impact people. And then something is happening in the tech space which changes that. So from a change perspective, you're constantly going back and forth and understanding. So there needs to be flexibility for change management to be monitoring and constantly updating and adjusting the plans based on feedback and change outcomes as well. So I think PMs need to allow that flexibility into that project plan. And maybe that's just building some contingency in there. as well. But that's not to mean that you use the contingency. I'm not talking in terms of dollars. I'm talking in terms of time. And then I think the last one for me is around when you build those governance structures that are important in project delivery, we need to be including that change management representation as well. And so whether it's on steering committees, with sponsor meeting updates, change control outcomes, and even building a dedicated change and PM catch-up, I think for me, they're the 5 top things that I think are really important that I wish every PM is aware of before they start that planning process. And the last thing is the PMs don't need to build that plan on their own. They do have a cohort and a brains trust that they can bring in to help build that plan. And I think that does a few things from the start. It creates a foundation of good teamwork and partnering, and also opens that opportunity for conversation so that everyone can contribute in their roles and responsibilities and build value for the outcome. Oh, you're a PM as well, Daniela. So I don't know how that resonates with you and what you've experienced as well.
It all really resonates with me. And as you're speaking, I'm grading myself in my head. What do you do and which bits do you do well and which bits don't you do well? And what can you take away from what Romaine said to you today that could make you better? And there's a couple of things in there that I absolutely loved. So just to touch on that team planning, I couldn't agree with you more. I must say throughout my career, I have always taken the approach of let me write the first version, because I tend to find that if I walk into a meeting room with nothing for people to focus their attention on, conversations become too blasé. I would rather people be able to point at what I've done and say, that's not correct, rather than say, oh, well, how about you do it this way, which is too high level and I need more specific. So I tend to find that's how I operate best. But then I open it up to discussion. So anybody who's not performing team planning, which basically says, go to the experts, ask them how it needs to be done. And that's how then you bring it all together and create this cohesive plan. And then you send it out again. Is this correct? No, make these changes, and you iterate through until you all get to the point where you're happy. I mean, for anybody who's not doing that, there's a real problem. And I do hear this quite a lot. But then when I move backwards from that, my key issue with change management is, and you would have experienced this yourself, it's very rare that when I'm doing the first cut of the plan that I have a change manager assigned. Yeah, because of the interpretation that change, comms, and training are all hooked up together. And therefore, because training and we need heavier comms towards the end rather than when we're in technical build, I have to be working on a pretty affluent project for me to be given the opportunity to have a change manager. Because remember, I've got this much budget, this many people that we need, and I've got to somehow whittle it down and find who's important at the right point in time. But what I love about what you're saying is that if you use a change manager correctly, what really should be happening is they become your eyes and ears on the ground. I can then focus on the technical and the tech teams and the devs and the testers and the quality and all the rest of it. And my change manager is my person that's out there with the community, constantly feeding back information around how is this landing? How are people feeling? Are they ready to go? Correct. What's the sentiment?
Yes.
Which then leads me to this concept with the contingency that you mentioned as well. I mean, I love the idea of contingency, but you and I are both living in the real world, Romaine. The reality is, anywhere I put the word contingency, I can pretty much guarantee that 3/4 of it will be scrapped.
It'll be what?
Right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a smart thing to do, but the reality is we don't always get that luxury. But coming back to it, and this is my final point, all of this leads me back to that concept of, do we measure our user sentiment to give us guidance, right? And this is where you could probably use your change manager best, is to be able to say, I'm out there with the troops. The troops are getting warmer or they're getting colder. What is it that you are doing, technical team and project manager, that is sending them in the opposite direction to where we need to be going? Is this just part of the, what did you call it before? The valley of something?
So the change curves can also, there's another term for it called the valley of despair.
Right.
Because you do take this down and sometimes it's hard to come out of that down before you bounce back up.
Yeah.
And so quite often people might sit in that valley bit. It's not a term that we like to use because it has a negative connotation.
Of course.
But it is about pushing people along there. And, I've been on major transformations where it's not just been the sentiment of the people that are on the outside being impacted by this change, but also the sentiment of the project team, because the project team sentiment spills out into
the world,
corporation,
Correct.
into the corporation. And we as project team members can have an impact on that sentiment as well if we're not saying the right things. I'm not talking about not being transparent, but not saying it in the right way that creates that positivity, which I think that sits well in the wheelhouse of both the change and the PM to really support their project team to create the right tone out in the broader corporate world as well.
Yeah. And I think that's true, but there's an element of this. So I think I've spoken to you about this before, where I worked for an organization and we did sentiment analysis for projects. And, what they discovered was that 90% of projects that have failed, the team were crucially aware that it was failing. And yet the people that needed to listen just weren't hearing it or weren't saying it for whatever reason, right? And what I find interesting about that is that, once again, change managers are really good at this. I just want to hear the truth about what's happening on the ground. And even if you are in that valley of despair, because I know this myself when I'm change managing myself, I vacillate between, it's like your final day at work for an organization that you've worked for many years. On the final day, you vacillate between being really excited to leave and being really sad about leaving.
True.
And you sit in that trajectory until you wake up the next morning where you're like, well, I've got no choice now. I've got to be happy about this. Yeah. So let's move forward, But it's exactly the same thing. And I'm sure that we do sit in there for a period of time, but you don't want to sit in there for too long. And something needs to eventually pull you out of the quagmire and start to push you up the hill. I agree with you. Selecting the right change manager is really important for that, because it's very easy to buy into negative sentiment when you are implementing something new for an organization. When people are in that pit of despair, it's very easy to get on that bus with them rather than saying, no, it's not going to be that bad. It is going to improve. You are going to get used to this. What kind of messaging do we use to get people feeling positive about this? Is that what you do?
Yeah, well, I think it's understanding why people are feeling in that valley part of the change curve. A lot of it is people are fearful of what that change means to their role, whether it's a breaking up of a little niche that they had, or maybe it is just that there has been so much change that they're just over it. So it's our responsibilities as change professionals to understand that sentiment and to use the change tactics and levers to find empathy. I think if you can find empathy and your stakeholders believe you, so you create trust. And if they share something with you, that you do something about it, or you're honest with them to say, look, I can't really do something about this. And that's why engagement is so important. It's not just flicking a comms out. It's actually about having human interaction, because that's actually how you move people along the way. If you think about what politicians do, That's exactly what they do. They're constantly, the good ones, they're constantly talking to us. Whether we listen or don't listen, it might be a message that we're interested in or not. But I think if you can get people in a face-to-face, it's so important to hear what they're feeling, because that way you've actually got tangible data points to do something with it. And that might be that you go to your leaders and say, I need your help. I need you to talk to person X. Or there seems to be a bit of a hotspot in PMY. I need to understand what I do in there. So it is very much about that. And it's not just accepting. I think you've got to try and use all mechanisms. And I find most people come along the journey at some points. It's just we're humans and we're not all built the same and got other priorities and have seen things go belly up. I think that's the other thing. If you don't preach at them and they start to see things, start to see positive outcomes, and where you've had conversations, you've gone back and turned it into an action that they can see, you build trust. And I think that's really important. And people will start to move.
Yeah. Such a journey, isn't
It
it?
is.
Yeah. You touched on another really important thing when you're talking about empathy and trust and how you use your project sponsor to do the job that they need to do. Because, you sort of said, well, how do you sit down with the PM and say, okay, we need a little bit of more work here or a little bit more work there or whatever it may be. The change sponsor, the project sponsor is your biggest change agent, right?
Yeah.
So how do you and the change manager and the sponsor work as a power triangle?
A power triangle. Yeah, triangle
That's
is,
it.
I try, look, and to get sponsors' time as a change manager, I find challenging because they're so busy. And so where I've seen it work really well is when the PM or the program manager, they typically have time with the sponsor. We create a 3-way leadership forum, if you like, where the change lead or the change manager comes into that. Now, sometimes we only get 5 minutes on an agenda because they're very interested in typically the finances and the tracking of the project and the risks and the issues. But I think it's also an opportunity to share with them around that sentiment that we're talking about. And then I've found the really good ones will actually ask in subsequent meetings, so what are you hearing and seeing? Because the good ones will actually go and do their homework and check whether what you've heard and said is true or not as well. And I think that then that builds that value in change as well. That again, it's about seeing and not just hearing. The sponsor can see and hear that the change manager is actually having the right conversations and bringing the right data points. And it's not just an emotional conversation that, we've got a lot of resistance. Or I think the worst thing is when the sponsor hears, no one knows what this change is about. That's not a good outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But really, change, it's interesting when you said that project sponsors are really interested in the risks and issues.
Yeah.
This is a really big
I
risk and
know,
issue.
but they tend to not focus on it from the human element. I don't know if that makes sense. Typically, when you go in and write risks and issues, they're all about what happens if the scope creep and this, I don't know, what are some of the other risks and issues off the top of my head?
It's true. Technical problems, supply chain problems, all sorts of things. Yeah, I totally get it. And you're kind of in a way right. But the interesting part about that is, and now that I'm just reflecting on it, the biggest risk to your project ever is adoption.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Is your people.
right. And therefore, I can spend $100,000 getting a truck to bring something from Tullamarine Airport to the city because the courier that was meant to do it in the beginning isn't going to be available on the day due to something else. Little things like that transpire all the time and we have to rectify them. But the biggest failure would be spending the entire amount on delivering a solution that people just fail to adopt or do not want to adopt. That is the biggest failure point because you've spent all the money by then. It's not just an element; it's the whole amount. You've gone.
You've spent your money and you're not going to realise your benefits because people aren't going to know, A, what the change is, why they need to get on board and what it means for their job. Yeah.
Correct.
So, no, absolutely. That's
Correct.
absolutely true.
Yeah, interesting. It's only just clicked into place for
it's
me
like on
as I listen to
well,
you.
it's like buying that fancy Porsche or a fancy car that's got all the bells and whistles. And if you don't know how to use it, you're not getting the benefits out of it. It's no different in a transformation piece of work in an organisation. You can put in all the bells and whistles, but if your people don't know how to get the best out of it and are not interested, then you haven't, got your benefit realisation and return on investment. So, yeah, absolutely. And these days, there's a human at the end of every piece of technology. So it doesn't matter whether you're upstream, downstream, sitting in a back room or a tech person. Everyone needs to understand what that change means for them and the cog that they're part of.
Yeah. I've become more and more attuned to this recently, the whole concept of the best solutions that we see out on the market are actually the ones that solve real human problems. And therefore, if you have not hit that emotional chord with a human that drives them to want to use your product or service, that's it. It's game over.
Game over, yeah.
It's really that. And so this is where the change management becomes so important because if you've not done everything you can to help that process along the way, and it does need help, it needs assistance and affection and love and care and all of those things, then you've done yourself a disservice. So it's a very good point. But next question, because we are so far off track now.
It's a good conversation.
I apologize. I've had fun. What should PMs do differently in the planning phase?
Look, I think we've touched on it in a bit in our chat so far, but I think don't feel, especially, and I know you've said that you don't always have a change manager at the start. And I think I'm starting to see a few organisations now bring change managers on early in that planning phase, which is a really positive sign. I get very excited when I hear this, and I've heard about it more recently. But don't build the plan. I'd say the big thing is don't build a plan and then ask the change manager to just slot in their activities at the end. And I know you talked about when you have that planning session, you've got to go in with something. But even with that something, I would hope that there's a conversation that's been had with your key sort of leadership team or part of that. And part of that would be bringing in that change. So even if I think that's the key. So make sure that you do build in those change elements, activities, and it's not just comms and training with it just a one long chevron or one long task that's comm and a block of time for training. It has to be more thought out than that, and that there are other elements of the change framework and delivery process that are really important that need to be considered. And also with that planning, I think it's about understanding what those dependencies are to the overall project milestones and activities, because that sets the tone for the whole project delivery team understanding the value and importance of the change activities, and that their work, like testing, like the design work, has an impact on the change activities and will impact the change timeline. So I think that's probably my key mantra. Bring them in early, and it's not just a tick in the box activity from a change perspective.
And so then if we go to the next stage, we've brought you in early. What would you tell PMs about collaborating with you on a day-to-day basis? Because, now that I'm hearing this whole concept of iterative and all the rest of it, I'm sort of thinking to myself, you know what? You'd be a great buddy for the BAs.
Yes.
You'd be a great buddy for the testers.
Yes.
Because all of these people are trying to understand what is it that I'm going to build that is going to make people happy and solve this problem
Correct.
And then how am I going to make sure that what we actually deliver solves that problem and that we are communicating that correctly, right?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden I'm seeing relationships that are really important to success.
Yeah, no, that is spot on, Daniela. So I think the key is to think of to think of change managers or PMs to think of change managers as their partners. Now, I know the reporting line in a formal structure might be that the change manager reports into the PM. And in the change management world, there's a lot of conjecture around that. Where should the change manager report into? But traditionally, that's where it does. Or they might sit alongside, or they both report into the program director or program manager. That doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the PM and the change manager, they're partners. So they're joined at the hip or joined at the shoulder, where a change practitioner is not just a service provider to the PM, and we're not simply a task taker and an executor. So we are integral to managing the people, and that partnership needs to be understood. And that's why I talked about the roles and responsibilities at the start, really understanding that. So invite us to planning sessions, to technical workshops, any activities where there's interface or interaction with the end customer or the end stakeholder. The change managers should at least be invited to those sessions, because it does a couple of things. It helps the change people understand their stakeholders, and it brings a different perspective, as you've said, around the technical solution versus what does this mean from a practical human perspective. And also I've talked about, well, not on this podcast, but I've talked about previously with other change managers, is sometimes you become the interpreter or the bridge between the technical people and the non-technical language that the end user actually wants to understand. So there's lots of reasons, but I think the key thing is it's partnering. It's not a tally and it's not a top-down. It's a partnering together to achieve the outcome.
Mm-hmm. I'll be honest, I had a project many, many years ago, which I was very, very fortunate. We had a massive budget to deliver something that was a big change for our entire organization and some new capability that they'd never had before and blah, blah, blah. And we had stakeholder managers, which were very similar, but they didn't have a change management background. But their role was very similar in that I need you to engage with all of these potential stakeholders, and I need you to really understand what it is they need and how we can get that delivered. And they played this very important intermediary role. Now, normally I don't really buy into that because I need to keep the users of systems as close to the development and testing team and the BAs as I possibly can, the least barriers to interpretation. Do you know what I mean? We don't want things being misinterpreted. We want especially our developers to hear it firsthand and understand it firsthand from a user's perspective, because that is how we're going to have the least amount of issues, right? I tend to find that when I have too many layers between developers and end users, things tend to go wrong. But I can see now how they play a very integral, important role in all of that, because there is a fine line between having a relationship with your user and then having too much of a relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So absolutely, it's a balance, and it's the right time. It's the timing as well. So I think initially it's about building those relationships and understanding your stakeholders, and then working alongside the project delivery team so that when it's the right time to bring those technical or BA or testers in with the end user, that you've built that relationship from a change perspective through the, if you want to call it, stakeholder relationship management, which is part of what change managers do. And then you bring the two parties together, but you are the bridge. And I find that that's what engagement is, talking and allowing the two, technical and the end user, to talk. And quite often, I know on one project, we were doing some cyber, and the cyber development in the IDAM space. And the technical guys were doing their thing. And then I started to do the engagement, and I brought the technical guys along with me. And the end users had some really good questions that the technical guys hadn't thought about. And it's not because they were not good at their job. It's just that they hadn't given it that end user perspective. And I think it actually de-risked some of the potential problems that we could have encountered. And also it then allowed the end users to feel that they'd been part of the process, which helped them come up that sentiment curve as well.
I actually had a fantastic conversation with a cognitive scientist. I've told you about her before, Leah DeBello from Future View. She's over in San Diego.
Yeah.
And she said exactly this, because we, totally by accident, talked about change management right at the end of the episode.
Yeah.
And I was asking her about the, behavioral science that's involved in change management. And she actually said, if you make people part of the solution, they will change manage much
Themselves.
better.
Yeah. You can't do it to
Yeah.
everyone though, because otherwise you'll be iterating forever. But but that's part of what I'm saying at the start. The change manager is getting out there and understanding their stakeholders. Who are the influencers? Who are the people that we need to keep on side? Then bringing them in partnership at the right time alongside those technical people. And it actually gave the technical guys a really good perspective. And they then became advocates for change back within the project team stand-ups themselves. It was a great win-win for the change perspective. So no, there's lots of benefit, but it's that iterative process that's so important.
It is. And what you say is absolutely true, Romaine, because when I reflect back on things that go wrong in projects, 99% of the time, it is because I didn't know. And the reason I didn't know was because I hadn't gone broad enough with asking people questions. And therefore, I had not uncovered things that later just popped up to bite me, the unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
So that's why I always advocate, when you're in planning, go as broad as possible, speak to as many people as possible. What do you need to do in order for this to flourish? And they will tell you, in my domain, I need this. In that domain, we need that. In change, we need this. In training, we need this. In legal, we need this. In policy. And that's how you build your plan, by purely understanding it from many people's perspectives.
Yeah.
Correct. And so what you say is absolutely right. There are lots of projects where things don't get discovered until the right people speak to the right people and ask each other questions. And you have to give them the space to have those conversations. You have to be encouraging people to talk to each other and book a meeting with this person. It may seem like a wasted hour of your time, but I guarantee when you get there, you're going to learn something. And that could be really consequential to what we're doing, and you just don't know where those conversations are going to be. So very important stuff. Now, going back to it, how can PMs support change and change work, especially with sponsors and stakeholders? How can we best support you?
Look, I think, as I said earlier, PMs typically will get airtime with the sponsors. It's kind of like a given. And look, a mature sponsor will give change airtime as well. But I think our sponsors are typically really very busy people, because they're typically senior in the organisation. So you talked about it, that what was it? The triangle you said, the PM or the change and the sponsor. Yeah, the power triangle. So I think if the PM can really build that structure into their governance process and have the change lead or the key change manager as part of that sponsor check-in, I think that's really important. And I think from a change perspective, we have a responsibility to come to those conversations with some structure, so that we are not seen as just having conversations about emotion, and demonstrate sentiment, demonstrate the activities that we're doing and how we're actually moving people along that change curve, and also, I guess, how our activities are aligning with the overall project delivery outcomes. I think if PMs can support us in those meetings and also come along to some of these stakeholder engagements that I've talked about, because the PM can be an advocate back within the within the project team as well, and support the change manager to have the right conversations if there's a little bit of resistance around, oh, change is just comms. We don't need to worry about that till later. That's training's problem. So I think, yeah, be prompt. Be actively involved with the sponsor, and the project manager can absolutely support that. Invite them as part, as I said, in the what are the 5 things, be part of that governance structure. So whether it's in steerco meetings and whatever other governance structures there are that the change manager can be part of, even if it's just listening, you learn so much that you can go away and adjust as part of your plans. And yeah, I think be an advocate, be an active advocate of change. Yeah.
And that then leads me to, I mean, even when we're talking about these forums and these meetings, and I have no problem with any of that. The more we engage on the minutiae and every element of a project, I mean, projects are detailed, right? If you are too abstracted from the detail, things don't go well. You need to have a certain amount of understanding of what's really happening at a very detailed level. But when I talk about governance structures, a lot of the time when I'm doing governance, I'm trying to roll up the detail in a way that it is meaningful, but it is not too detailed. Because I only have an hour of your time.
Yeah.
I need to get you across what you need to feel comfortable about and uncomfortable about. And then I need to ask you to make some decisions. And you know that hour goes so quickly. By the time everybody gets their feet under the table, by the time we've said our hellos, gone through action items from last time, you know, that the time just gets away from us really quickly. However, once again, going back to that concept of how do I put metrics around change management that allows me to measure it consistently and give you voice and agency, but not so much that, you know, I don't have the time in these meetings to talk about risks and issues that really do need a bit more of our focus. So how do we balance that out? What do we do?
It's a really good question. And I don't know that there's a simple answer for this, to be honest. In terms of change management metrics, what you mean by that is, are we tracking correctly or to the plan?
Well, I want to measure the important things, right?
Yeah.
So you and I have spent an entire hour now talking about the fact that sentiment is really important. Team and user sentiment, right? If I had the luxury of a change manager and I said, okay, well, I want to keep my eye on these things, but I can't dedicate 2 or 3 hours to it every week, how can you feed me information and use KPIs and things of that nature to try and communicate to me, are we on track with things that are important? And therefore, I can leave certain things alone, and then I can have more detailed conversations with you, which says, well, this one looks a little bit amber or red. What does that mean? And then you can go, okay, let's take a deep dive into that one. This particular user group is feeling particularly unsettled because we're taking away functionality that they've always had, and they're not happy about it, and they're not sure how they're going to do that moving forward. And then that gives me an opportunity to say, okay, should we develop that functionality, or are we removing it because we don't want to use that functionality anymore and we're diverting to a new process? Like, these are the kinds of detailed conversations I need to have. And your feedback is really important to that, because the reality is 9 times out of 10 with a project, you discover that stuff by accident when it's too late.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I had the luxury of having you, but then again, I don't want to go into the detail of every single sentiment that people are experiencing.
No.
So how do I find the balance using potentially metrics and KPIs?
I don't know that there's metrics per se, but one of the activities as part of the change framework is we conduct a change impact assessment. And that's really about understanding what happens today or what the current state is, what is the new future state going to look like, and what are the gaps. And there's some, I guess, segments that we might dive into around process, technology, people, customers, policy. And then we construct that document in a detailed way. Then we have to disseminate it into a summary by a cohort or user group or team, and we share that back with them. So this is how we start to take them along that journey. Through that process of engagement, we get really good data points, to your point, around how they're feeling about this change. Is it actually going to work? What are the gaps that we haven't considered? And what design elements maybe we need to tweak, or have we thought about a part of the business that maybe has not been part of our original scope? So they're the kind of data points that we can then bring back. I wouldn't say that's KPIs per se, because that's not typically something that we would manage. But then there's other business readiness activities that we might do, which will give us heat points in the business and hotspots that we can have conversations with, that we might need to put some more effort and helicopter some Band-Aid or support processes in there to support. So there are metrics that we can bring. They're not hard and fast, I guess, number data, but it will tell us if we have, say, for example, we have 1,000 people who are impacted by a change. There's 20 teams in that. Within each of those teams, there's 100 people, and that isn't good. That should add up to about 1,000. As I start engaging with each of those segmented cohorts, I will start to get some of those data points. And that's then how I can draw that bottom up or top down approach around what are my hotspots and how many people do I think out of that 1,000 are my challenge area, and how many are along that curve. So absolutely, that's some of the data that we can bring to the table. Is that kind of what you mean?
It is, because even when I think about KPIs, right, key performance indicators,
yeah.
if my project is performing, the indicators should follow that change management curve.
Yep.
At the start, people are, somewhat excited about what's
Correct.
going to happen. Then they get more and more excited as they see the shiny new tool. And then they start to get really stressed. And then they're going to hit rock bottom. And then they're going to start to make their way. So I should be able to plot that really, really accurately.
Yes.
And if we're doing our job correctly, it may not follow it exactly, because you may find that people sit at the bottom of the valley of despair for way too long. But at the end of the day, if you're doing it, I assume if you are doing it correctly, and please do correct me, that you will start to see progress along that pathway.
Absolutely. And so that valley of despair, as you said at the start, might be a lot of people. But then as you start to do your engagement, as you start to feed real information, as you start to open up those feedback loops, and people have a voice, and you can bring that back. It's like the gold mining. When you start shifting it, there should be few people sitting there, and they'll be starting to move up that curve. And this is dependent on the complexity of the transformation. You can start to do more formal business readiness surveys, if you like, and people hate surveys, but they are good for tracking that, if that's what's appropriate for the complexity and outcome that you want to make sure that you're hitting at the end of the day. So that's why you need a proper change team. And that's why change teams is a plug for change teams need to be resourced properly to deliver the best change outcomes. If it's just comms that you want, then you might need one person. But that's not going to give you the data points that you're asking for either.
Correct. I love what you're saying. I love the fact that you keep talking about feedback loops, because I think it is an area that is sorely underutilized. but very, very effective. And I love the idea of having constant iterative feedback. And, when I look at some of the highly successful people out in the market, they use the tools available to them to constantly collect feedback from users and sentiment from users. And they use that as a litmus test as to how are we progressing, how are we doing, are we listening to our people and what it is that they want. So I think all of these things are really important. But I suppose, once again, as you say, it's about investing in change management and understanding everything it can do.
Well, as I said at the start, I think one of the things is, do PMs understand what change management is? And so I think that's part of our responsibility without preaching theory, because it puts people off. But it is trying to build that collaborative partnering relationship and work alongside them, and making them see the tangible outcomes and feedback. And then it's amazing how the pathway clears and you can achieve great outcomes together, rather than it's the PM telling, oh, have you done this activity? Have you done that activity? It's not that kind of relationship. We do work alongside each other.
Last question for you.
Yes.
What is the biggest benefit, if you had to just sum it up in either one bullet point or two or three? What's the biggest benefit to a PM in working closely with their change manager?
Well, I think you engage an expert who can support with the people outcomes so that you can drive better value for whatever you're delivering. And so I think by partnering early and often, you'll get better visibility of the stakeholder concerns and readiness gaps, when you can still address them relatively cheaply, given that we don't have a lot of contingency in our budget. And I think it also builds that trust with the business. So they see a united project team that cares about the success and not just ticking a box. So I think if you invest in the right change manager who's the right fit for your organization, and allow them to build a team if that's what's needed, and really have them as part of the conversations, I think you'll see much better outcomes. And it's far more enjoyable from a change perspective to work alongside a PM in that environment as well. So empower your change person to be the best, to deliver the best, is what I would say.
Yeah, I'm having this physical reaction to what you're saying in a way that's almost like, I feel now after this conversation with you, I could engage you on a project and just let you be my peer and my colleague.
That's what it should be.
Do you know what I mean?
That's exactly what it should be, yeah. And I
And
will say,
that's-
I'm speaking on behalf of us as change managers, we don't always deliver in a way that people have that view of change managers as well. So I think some of it rests on us, that we can do better as well as a profession. Yeah.
Interesting. Any closing thoughts from you?
Oh, well, I think coming back to that, when PMs plan with change managers from the start, you'll get fewer surprises, stronger adoption, and better outcomes for everyone. And if we can remember one thing, that planning for technology readiness without the people readiness is definitely planning for failure. So, I talk about from a tech perspective, but any change discipline, if you haven't got the human at the center of what you're doing, then what are you actually delivering, to be honest? Because at the end of the day, everything we do these days has a human element. And so it is very much about making sure that the people understand what that change means for them, so that they can feel confident in adopting that new way of working. So make sure that your change managers sit alongside and really partner with the PMs and give them the space to do their thing.
So, very last question for you, Miss Romaine.
Yes.
Very last question. As a change manager, are you still learning?
Always, Daniela, which is why I love what I do. And because I work in project world, no project is the same, although some of the mistakes that we make are still the same decades later. But no, it's different people, different organisation, different problems. Mind you, it can have its frustrations as well. But yes, always learning. And that's what I love, taking information and experiences from one, bringing it across to another, but learning and iterating all the time. So it's never dull. And that's what I love.
Very good. All right. Well, Romaine, thank you so much for exploring all of those areas with me and sharing your invaluable insights on integrating change management into project planning. Your advice is essential for any project manager that's aiming for project success. So, how can listeners find you and learn more about you?
Thanks for having me, Daniela. It's been great. I've enjoyed our chat. And I am really pleased that some of our conversation has enlightened you and you've thought about it as well. So that's amazing. So I'm on LinkedIn, Romaine Charlton, or I've also got my website, romainecharlton.com. So find me there.
Beautiful. I will put that in the show notes for everybody. Now, as we wrap up, once again, a very, very big thank you. You are such a beautiful person. You've got such a lovely aura about you. Very easy to talk to you for an hour and a half.
I can't believe it's gone that fast.
Very, very easy. And thank you for taking us on the change management journey today. It's lovely to pass time with you. And of course, talk about my favorite topic, which is projects. And thank you to all of our faithful listeners for tuning into this episode of Powering ProjeX. As you know, I welcome your feedback. Hence, feel free to drop us a comment or a suggestion. And thanks in advance for caring enough to share it with me. And in closing, if you want to join a community that puts your career first, gain global connections, cutting-edge skills, and hear from voices just like Romaine's who are shaping the project management industry, please do subscribe, drop us a review, and tell your friends. So let's make change management a project game changer. Until next time, keep powering your projects with purpose from vision to victory. This is DK and Romaine signing out. Bye. The content provided in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional, legal, or financial advice. The opinions expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of any affiliated organisations or sponsors. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information on project management methodologies and related topics, no guarantee is made regarding the completeness, accuracy, or applicability of the content to your specific circumstances. Listeners are encouraged to consult with qualified professionals before making decisions based on the information shared in this podcast. The hosts, guests, and producers are not liable for any losses, damages, or outcomes resulting from the use of this podcast's content. By listening to this podcast, you agree to assume all risks associated with the application of the information provided. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you'll find value in our discussions.